Okay, I'm going to get started with this next topic of the 5 precepts, a householder's guide to daily practice. This is where you're going to learn 5 impactful decisions that can be made either wisely or unwisely, and it's going to produce either wholesome or unwholesome results for you. So what I'm going to do is share with you the original words of the Buddha on this important topic, and then I'm going to show you how to relate it to day-to-day decisions that you're making, so that way you can apply it in your day-to-day life and experience the benefits and the results. Whenever you're learning something like this, it's important to remember that the Buddha is teaching you the natural law of karma. He's not teaching you what you should or shouldn't be doing in terms of trying to convince you of anything. He's not trying to force or control you to do anything. He's not giving you rules or commandments. He's helping you see this cause and effect, or this action and result, the results of your decisions. In fact, each one of these 5 precepts is helping you eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance, because there's a certain amount of these pollutions that are in the mind if a mind doesn't understand these 5 precepts and isn't practicing them closely. So I'll kind of point that out to you along the way. But as I'm going, understand that my goal here isn't to convince you to do anything or to make any decisions any particular way. My goal is to share with you the natural law of karma so that you can see it more and more clearly for yourself. And then what you choose to do, it's up to you. It's your choices. It's your decisions. It's your life. It's not my life, right? So you'll experience whatever results that you make decisions about. You'll experience that result. But having the knowledge of this natural law of karma, you can make wiser and wiser decisions that lead to more and more wholesome results. So just like always, you guys are welcome to ask questions either here or online. If you guys could use the mics, and then those of you guys online, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So understanding these 5 precepts, we're going to start with the first one. These are the words of the Buddha on this first precept. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. Okay, so this is the words of the Buddha where he's explaining this precept. But remember, you're not interested in believing anything. You need to examine, you need to investigate his teachings. So obviously here he's talking about something with living beings. He's talking about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So the first thing you should probably ask yourself is, what is a living being? Right? Don't assume that you know what a living being is. You need to really investigate and examine this. Well, the Buddha teaches a teaching called the 5 aggregates. You might think of this as the 5 criteria, or the 5 elements, or the 5 collections that determine what is a living being and what isn't a living being. These 5 things determine what is a living being and what isn't a living being. And I'm going to share that teaching with you, but you're not even interested in believing that. You need to independently verify what I'm sharing, right? Because you know you are a living being. So when I teach you these 5 aggregates, or these 5 criteria, you should be able to identify that you have all 5 of these. So the first one is that a living being is going to have physical form, right? You have physical form. Every living being is going to have physical form. They're going to have feelings, those pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. They're also going to have perceptions. What a perception is your views and opinions about the world. Then you're going to have volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. A living being is going to have free will. Then the 5th one is a consciousness, or the mind. So every living being is going to have form, feelings, perceptions, which are your views and opinions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then they're going to have a consciousness, or a mind. So you can look at every living being, whether it's a squirrel, a rabbit, a bird, a human being. We all have these 5 aggregates, and that's how you can independently verify this. But then you can also take things that you know are not living beings in order to be able to independently verify it too. So this chair that I'm sitting in, does it have physical form? Yeah, it has physical form, right? Does it have feelings? Doesn't have any feelings. It doesn't get angry. It doesn't get frustrated, right? Does it have perceptions, views and opinions about the world? Doesn't have those. Does it have volitional formations? Does it make choices and decisions? Can it choose to pick itself up and walk down the street and put itself back down? Doesn't have that. Does it have a consciousness or a mind? It doesn't, right? So we can see that these 5 aggregates applies. And this definition is held up for 2,500 years. So the Buddha describes what a living being is, and that's important for you to know, because anytime you cause harm to a living being, that harm is going to come back to you. So you need to know what is a living being. And the 5 aggregates are going to help you to be able to discern that and figure that out. Well, you're going to need to penetrate into that teaching more and more closely and be able to understand it. But in the meantime, if you're looking for kind of a shorthand way to think about this, as I've shared that here, is that a living being is oftentimes going to come from an egg, a sperm, and it's going to have a consciousness. This isn't true in all situations. That's why the Buddha didn't teach it, because it's not a natural law. But about 99.9% of the time, this is true. There's some rare situations where a living being has all those 5 aggregates, but it doesn't come from an egg, a sperm, but they all have consciousness, but they just don't all come from an egg and a sperm. So this is kind of like a shorthand way for you to think about it for now. Okay, but you'd really like to understand the 5 aggregates. That's going to help you the most. So we can see through the 5 aggregates that plants, bacteria, viruses, things like this, they're not living beings. But the challenge is that we use language that refers to them as if they are. Because we'll say, oh, don't kill that plant, or I'm going to kill this plant, or I'm going to kill this bacteria that's in my body by taking this antibiotic, right? So we tend to use language that isn't truly the truth, that it's not based in wisdom. We're not actually truly killing that plant. We are harvesting it. That's what we're doing. We're harvesting the resources of this plant. We're not truly killing the bacteria that's in our body. We're actually eliminating it out of our body. So you can see that these things don't have the 5 aggregates. That's why you don't experience unwholesome results. Because not only can you see that these things like plants, bacteria, and viruses aren't living beings through the 5 aggregates, you can see it through the natural law of karma, of cause and effect. Because whenever you kill a living being, you will experience unwholesome results as part of that. But when you eliminate a bacteria from your body, you're actually experiencing wholesome results. That's how you can see that it's not a living being as well, because when you eliminate it, you're experiencing wholesome results. If it was a living being and you were truly killing it, you would actually experience unwholesome results from doing so. So you need to be able to see what is a living being and what isn't a living being, because the Buddha is teaching you to live compassionately for all living beings. And you're going to need to be able to discern what is a living being and what isn't. And oftentimes we think of plants very fondly, which is wise, right? But if you see these as a living being, you wouldn't necessarily be able to practice this precept as closely as you could. And you can see that plants aren't a living being as well through the natural law of karma as well. If I harvested a broccoli and now this plant is no longer viable, I've experienced something wholesome that I'm now able to eat. I'm able to have this food, right? So if this plant was a living being and I killed it, I would experience unwholesome results in this situation, but I'm not. I'm experiencing wholesome results. So the way that you discern what is a living being and what isn't a living being is by the 5 aggregates. So then once you understand what the Buddha is teaching here through investigating what a living being is, and that he's suggesting to you to practice compassion, what compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. So this is where you would like to then ask yourself about these kinds of things. Would you participate in euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, any government-sponsored killings, or murder? These are all intentional killings. But whether you do these things or not is a choice for you to make. Remember, I'm not here to convince you of what you should or shouldn't be doing. I'm just going to help you to see the natural law of karma, because there's these kinds of things that I can show you in situations where it could potentially be a wise decision to do these things, and in other situations it might not. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to apply this precept, because it's not black and white, right? It's not like the Buddha's not teaching you here to preserve all life at all cost. That's the way sometimes people interpret it, but you're never interpreting the teachings of the Buddha. You're just seeing, what is he teaching? He's teaching you to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because if you go outside intentionally trying to kill or murder another being, there's a certain amount of craving and longing, yearning there. There's a certain amount of anger. There's a certain amount of ignorance, not realizing that you're going to cause harm to this being, and now harm is going to come back to you. But let's just take something like termination of a pregnancy. Now, sometimes people think that this is like a political discussion. I don't think of it that way. I don't talk about politics. This is a human discussion, that we have this technology, and there are certain situations where it can actually be helpful, and there are certain situations where it could be harmful. Which option somebody chooses, that's a choice for them to make. It's not up to me to make a choice for somebody else. So what I'm going to share with you here is a situation where it could be helpful and beneficial, and you could be practicing this precept by terminating a pregnancy. And I'm going to share some examples with you where you could be terminating a pregnancy and not practicing this precept. And you guys are going to need to see it for yourself. So let's just say I was a woman, which obviously I'm not, right? If I had a womb and I had a fetus growing in this womb, and let's just say the doctor shared with me, hey, this fetus that's in your womb, it's never going to live a viable life outside of the womb. We can see that through the medical technology that we have. And as long as you leave this growing in your womb, it's threatening your life, and you could die at any time. Well, if that individual if I chose to terminate this pregnancy, I'm living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because the first one you need to have compassion for is yourself. You can't have compassion for others if you don't practice compassion for yourself. So in this situation, somebody could terminate that pregnancy and feel confident that they're not going to experience unwholesome results. They're going to experience wholesome results, or wholesome gamma, right? So in this situation, you can rest at ease knowing that you're making a wise decision in that situation. And this is probably like a once in a lifetime kind of thing, maybe twice in a lifetime for some people, right? It's pretty rare that these kinds of things occur, but it can occur. And this is a situation where you might use termination of a pregnancy to make a wise decision that's going to be helpful and produce wholesome gamma. But also, let's just say I was sexually promiscuous and I was having sex with lots of different people, and now I'm getting pregnant regularly. Maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times I'm choosing to terminate a pregnancy. Well, each time that I do this, it's causing more and more harm to the beings that are growing inside, because I'm using it as birth control now, right? And now each time this medical procedure is being done, it's going to be causing harm to this body, right? So now I'm experiencing unwholesome gamma because I'm using it 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different times. And now this body is going to start to experience difficulties because of that. So it's not whether you do the particular thing, it's where you got to look at the intention behind it. What is your intention here? How are you exercising this? And this is a decision for you guys to make. Nobody can make that decision for you. Each individual person needs to make the decision for themselves. So you can see where termination of a pregnancy could potentially be beneficial and helpful in some situations, but it could also be harmful in other situations. And you need to be able to see that for yourself. Let's take some other examples here. Let's just say like war. Let's say that a government could say, hey, we would like you to go over there and kill those people. That land over there, go over there, march over there, take your guns and your weapons and go kill those people, right? If you kill people over there, we're completely fine with that. But if you kill people over here on our land, oh, we're going to arrest you for murder. We're going to put you in jail, right? This is the problem with human laws, is that they're imperfect, right? The natural law of gamma is not biased. It's the most unbiased teacher you will ever find. So while a government could tell you to go over there and kill those people, and we're fine with that, but if you kill people over here, we're going to arrest you for murder, you can't escape the natural law of gamma. If you go over there and you kill those people, you're still going to be affected by that decision. This is why people that go off to war oftentimes are killed themselves, or they have medical problems with their body. They might come back home addicted to drugs or alcohol. They might commit suicide. They might have difficulties reintegrating into society in terms of getting employment and housing and things like this. This is the natural law of gamma, of having gone off to war and fought and killed, and now this individual is struggling and having difficulties because of those types of things. So you can't escape the effects of the natural law of gamma. Now, while a government could tell you that, hey, go over there and kill those people, you need to decide for yourself whether or not that would be wise or unwise. Here's another example. Say your house was getting eaten by termites, right? And now you got this termite infestation at your house. You might ask yourself, well, what should I do in this situation? How do I live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? Well, remember, the first beings that you need to have compassion for is yourself. If you allowed these termites to just eat your house up, that's not living compassionately, because you're not going to have a shelter to take care of yourself, right? So what I would suggest you do, and what me and my wife actually did, because we had this exact situation, is we researched online. Is there a way to eradicate these termites without killing them, right? And when you research this and you try to figure it out, what you're most likely going to come back with is no, there's not a way to do that. And you might need to hire somebody to come eradicate these termites, and they're going to end up needing to kill them. Well, in this situation, you're still living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because you tried to find a way to eradicate them without actually killing them. One of the challenges of being in the animal world is that they don't have the level of consciousness as a human being. Because human beings, if we ate wood, we would go out into the forest where it's not hurting anybody, it's not harming anyone, and we would just eat those trees. And we would know, like, hey, we're not harming anyone. But these animals, these insects, don't have that level of consciousness. So they're going to eat this house, not realizing they're causing harm. And now this harm that they're causing, this harm is coming back to them. So that's one of the challenges of being in the animal realm, right? So you might be in situations where you do need to actually kill this being, right? And you can make sure that you're doing that with compassion, making sure that you're practicing this compassion before you choose to do something like that, right? So these are some examples that I share with you. And then students will typically ask me these kinds of questions that I put into the book. So I'll share these with you as well. A student asked me before about a DNR. I don't know if you guys know what this is. It's called a Do Not Resuscitate. It's a legal document that you can sign while you're alive that informs your family members that should this being die, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. And people say, is this living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? And I share with them, yes, because you haven't killed anybody. There's no intentional killing there. That all you're saying is, I'm comfortable with death. You don't need to bring me back to life. So you haven't actually killed any being whatsoever. Sometimes people ask me about defense and protection. So like if someone was breaking into your house at 3 a.m. in the morning, they were breaking your windows and climbing in through the window. I can assure you they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers, right? At 3 a.m. breaking into your window. That's not what's happening. They're there to cause harm. And what I suggest for people is I suggest for them to get out of the house if you can. But not everyone's going to be able to do that, right? You might look out your window and there's a fire. Maybe there's a gang of people outside. So this practice and these teachings that the Buddha is sharing with you, it's not plug and play. It's not if this happens, do that. And if this happens, do that. There's not a permanent answer for each one of these things. You actually need to move to a higher consciousness where you're taking in the unique variables of the situation and deciding what would be wise or unwise for you in any situation. So if someone was breaking into my house at 3 a.m. and I could get out of the house with my family, I'd get out. They want to destroy something. They want to steal something, whatever. Okay, go ahead. I'm out of here. I'm going to call the police. They're the ones who have the training. They have the equipment. They can take care of it, right? I'm going to go somewhere where we can be safe. But in some situations, you can't get out. Maybe they're blocking the door. Maybe there's a gang of people outside. Maybe there's a fire. So if you're backed up in the corner and this person's sitting there getting ready to stab you with a knife, you wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings just to let this person stab you and kill you or one of your family members, right? So if you needed to cause harm to this being in order to stop this attack from coming, you're living compassionately, right? You didn't go out looking for this. This individual came at you trying to cause you harm. And now because of their decision to cause harm, harm is coming to them. So living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, it doesn't say to preserve all life at all cost. That's not what it's saying. It's saying to live compassionately. And you are a living being and you need to be compassionate to this living being, being concerned for the welfare of this living being. So in that situation, if you were having self-defense, what I suggest you do is cause the least amount of harm as possible. If they have a stick, get a bigger stick. Right? Get a baseball bat or something like that, right? Try to put this harm down in the least amount of harm as possible. Then sometimes people ask me about consuming animal products or eating plant-based food and vegan. One of the things that you will notice is that if you eat meat now, there's a certain amount of drugs and hormones and toxins that you're ingesting. You're not just ingesting the flesh of the animal itself. There's certain drugs and hormones and toxins that's in that flesh. They've done scientific studies on this where they've taken wild fish out of a certain stream and they've tested the flesh, and they found cocaine, they found antidepressants, they found all these different substances because us humans are flushing that down into the water table, into the toilets, and now it's polluting the water, and now the fish are absorbing that. So then when you eat it, you're eating those substances. And even farmers, they're putting antibiotics and growth hormones and things like this into their animals. And when people are eating those things, you're eating those kinds of things. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there's little girls that are having their menstrual cycle as early as age 5 now. And this is thought to be from the growth hormone that is being put into the animals and that they're growing faster. I noticed this with my son. When he was first growing up, he was eating meat. He had more hair on his legs at the age of 8 than I had when I was like 14 or 16, right? So you can see these kinds of things. That's the independent verification where you can see it for yourself. So if you would like to move to a plant-based food supply, one of the things you're going to see is that the health of the body and the health of the mind is going to improve because you're not ingesting those drugs and hormones and toxins. When or if you ever choose to do that, it's a choice for you to make. Again, I'm not here to convince you to do anything whatsoever. But in terms of getting to a peaceful and joyful mental state and a peaceful and joyful life, and having the best results in terms of wholesome karma, that's what I'm sharing with you, is what is the natural law of karma, and seeing this cause and effect, or this action and result. And you can see that when we're eating animals, we're killing, and now through that killing, ingesting that meat, get to a point where you can understand the natural law, and then you make whatever choices that you would like to make. A teacher isn't here to tell you what to do or convince you what to do. We're just here to help you see the natural law. So do you guys have any questions on this first one, which is the first precept? I'm just going to reset all of this stuff.
So, in determining if a being has, what did you say? You said if it has feelings. But what about unintentional? Like we could be walking along the street and, unintentionally step on an ant or a spider or something like that.
Sure. So in order to produce karma, there has to be intention behind your decision. So if you were walking down the street stomping and trying to kill the cockroaches and the crickets and stuff like that, there's a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance there that's going to affect you, right? Because you're intentionally, actively trying to kill other living beings. And there's going to be craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind. But if you're just walking down the street on the sidewalk and an ant or a cockroach runs under your foot, there's no intention there. You don't have craving, anger, and ignorance in that situation. You're just walking down the street. And it was the decision of the cockroach to run under your foot. It wasn't your decision. So you didn't intentionally kill this being. There has to be intention behind a decision in order to produce karma. Amen. You got a question?
Thank you. A few years ago, my doctor in London, he said to me, I don't eat meat. He said, you should eat meat for a couple of specific reasons he gave me. And I thought, oh, okay. And I didn't. And I thought about it for a while. And I realized, I thought, I'm prepared to take a bit of a hit on my health for what I think is probably something that's important to me. I don't particularly want to be any part of killing or eating or anything to do with that, an animal, Was I being unwise or was I not?
So you said you chose not to eat meat, or
I chose not to eat meat.
Yeah, so every situation is going to be different, right? So oftentimes medical doctors, they understand medical things, but they don't necessarily understand the natural laws. They don't understand plant-based food. There's other doctors that do have that wisdom, right? So just because someone told you that you should eat meat and they're wearing a white jacket in a position of authority, doesn't mean you should just believe what it is that they're sharing. You need to make your own decisions based on your own wisdom. So whether you were making a wise decision in that choice or not, I don't know all the variables to be able to share that with you. For me, I don't eat meat at this point in my life. Obviously, I did in the past, but I don't eat meat any longer. And I've noticed a significant improvement to the health of the body and the mind from having done so. But each situation's a little bit different, right? We're kind of like the first large generation of people that are kind of moving back to a plant-based food supply, because at one time human beings were plant-based eaters. When we first started, we were all plant-based eaters. That's why our teeth look very much like a cow. They look like a horse, because we're plant-based eaters. That's the way we started out. But initially, as we were eating all those plants, we exhausted the forest for plants. So we started eating meat out of necessity because we had so much of a larger population. So we started being scavengers at first. And we started running away animals. When they killed their animal to eat, we would run those animals away and take over their kill. And then that wasn't enough meat for us. So we started doing organized hunting. We started organizing as human beings, killing animals and eating them for ourselves. That wasn't enough meat. So we started to do manufactured farming. And that's where we are now, where there's, I think in America alone, I think there's like 25 million animals a day that are being killed in America alone, the USA. So there's just been this, proliferation of eating meat. But we've been doing that for so long that now a lot of us, our human bodies are kind of dependent on this meat. So if we're starting to transition over to a plant-based food supply, oftentimes people will take supplements because there's a particular vitamin, it's called B12, that doesn't show up in most plants. There's like a rare algae and a seaweed or something that has it, but it's very rare. So as people are starting to transition over to plant-based food and they're taking supplements, some people can live completely fine like this and be fine. But there's going to be other people whose body doesn't adapt to it, and they're going to need to maybe eat some animal products like eggs or cheese or a little bit of milk or maybe even a little bit of meat here and there. So it's possible to still get to enlightenment and live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings and still eat a little bit of that stuff. Oftentimes what people do is they try to move towards a plant-based food supply as much as possible, and they'll do that for an extended period of time using the supplements and things of this nature. And then if they start having issues, like I did after about 5 years of that, I started having some issues. So I started needing to eat a little bit of eggs, and I started eating a little bit of ice cream and some cheese and things like this. And that allowed my B12 to come back up because the supplements weren't providing enough. So this is still living compassionately, where I don't eat meat, but I still eat a little bit of eggs and cheese and things like this because the supplements weren't working to be able to bring my B12 up. I'm probably going to at some point go back to eating all plants because now I eat 99.9% plants, but I'll probably go back to that and try to see if the supplements will work again. But right now, this is what I'm choosing to do. So whether it was a wise decision for you or not, that's something that you need to decide. It sounds like it was. If you're healthy, if you're able to maintain your health, both physically and otherwise, then yeah, that was a wise decision. But if you're noticing that your health is decreasing and that eating a little bit of animal products will improve that, you should feel comfortable in doing that, because you can't even cling to something like plant-based food. If you hold on to it and you cling to it, this body could be deteriorating and you're not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, which would be this being. So you need to find the middle way. I suspect that as more and more of our generation is transitioning to plant-based food, we'll get to a point where all humans can eat plant-based food without any supplements or anything. And the reason why I say that is because I have a student who she's been a plant-based eater ever since she was in the womb. Her mom ate plant-based food. And she's never had even a sliver of meat in her mouth before. And she's in her 50s and she's been eating plants her entire life. And I've asked her, I said, do you take supplements? She's like, no, I've never needed them. Right? So human beings can adjust and adapt going back to plant-based food, but we're going to need multiple generations for the body to adjust to that. And the people like us that are kind of in this transitionary period, some of us are probably going to still need to eat a little bit of animal products out of living compassionately for this living being because our bodies have been so dependent on meat for so long. I think Eamon's got a follow up.
Sorry. Yeah. Also, it brought into focus about that. I try to avoid being too precious about this body that I'm currently inhabiting. You know what I mean? And this brought it into focus. You know, the idea that, you know, if I have meat, then my doctor was implying that I would be a higher functioning.
Yeah. There. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You guys will need to change those batteries. The ones that are in the box, those are should be charged up.
So finding a balance in that as well is quite important. Although this was an aside, because I was thinking, you know, I've always loved the animals roaming around this. I wouldn't want to kind of kill one and eat one. It was just a boring idea to me. But also it gave me an opportunity to not go down that. I mean, I used to go to McCormick. They give you B12 jabs there, and afterwards I would do it. I thought, what am I trying to do here? I'm okay. I'm not trying to perfect this thing that's each day is very slowly deteriorating. I think my time, instead of going to McCormick and getting an injection, my time might be better spent sitting down and thinking, yes, I'll just observe this thing deteriorating and see what I can do, you know? It's like that.
This same student that I was just describing, she had a problem with her knee because she's a runner. And her doctor told her that she needed to start eating meat in order to rebuild the cartilage. And she reached out to me and she said, what do you think? And the first thing I said, I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't give you medical advice. But what I do suggest is that you find some other opinions. You know, visit a doctor. And I asked her, I said, was your doctor a plant-based eater? And she said, no. And I said, you might decide to find a doctor who eats plants because they're going to be more knowledgeable about that. And then they'll be able to give you a medical opinion about whether or not you truly need to be eating meat or not. And that's what she did. She went and saw a doctor who eats plants. And this doctor said, oh, no, you don't need to eat meat in order to rebuild the cartilage. You can do this, you can do that. So each doctor is going to have different amount of wisdom. And sometimes they have a craving themselves and they're clinging to their own views and opinions. And then they're trying to impress that upon you. So if you ever hear something that you're like, I'm not so sure about that, you can always ask me, but I don't have any medical knowledge really that a doctor would have. So that's why it's important to seek other opinions. And people who do eat plant-based food as a doctor, they're going to be more knowledgeable in these kinds of things and be able to give you more accurate advice about that stuff.
So in terms of not consuming animal products, obviously that would entail not buying products made of leather as well, I'm assuming. And also, is there a distinction between being vegan or vegetarian? Because if you're vegetarian, the animal, if you're eating cheese or I guess eggs, would eggs be, but milk, the animal has not been killed. And the other question is, in terms of protein, because I know that there is protein in vegetable products, legumes, etc., but there's not as I'm not a nutritionist, but I don't think there's as much protein in vegetables or some non-meat products as there would be in meat. So how would you square that?
Yeah, you can live a perfectly fine life eating all plant-based food. There's actually professional bodybuilders who are like bulked up that eat plants exclusively. There's a ton of them that are out there very successful in their career. So it's a big myth that you can only get protein from meat, or that there's not enough protein in fruits and vegetables and stuff like that, because they wouldn't be able to bulk up the way that they do if they didn't get the protein that they needed. So there's plenty of protein in plants and things like this. The first part, if you could ask one question, because usually I just focus on one thing at a time. But what was your first question? Oh, yeah. So with vegetarian and vegan, right? Vegetarian, they're still eating eggs, milk, cheese, things like this. there's still an effect for that, right? Because like the animals are drinking the groundwater, they're still potentially having antibiotics, different things like this, drugs and hormones and toxins. So even in those eggs and that cheese and that milk, you're still experiencing some results, right? And these animals are still being enslaved to provide us something, right? Like if there was some being that was a higher being than us humans, let's say there were some giants walking around and they put us in cages and they were harvesting things off of our bodies in order to eat them, we wouldn't stand for it. We would all figure out a way to come together and like revolt, right? And we would like kind of try to repel these giants as much as we can. But these animals don't have that level of consciousness, so they don't do that. They can't do that. But yet we're enslaving these animals in order for us to get things like eggs and cheese and milk, where all these things can actually be provided in other ways, right? But we've done these things for so long, we've become accustomed to it. But as your loving kindness and your compassion starts to grow more and more in your mind, you might find that you're less and less interested in doing that stuff. And you might start moving more and more towards plant-based food, because there is still an effect not only to our human body by eating those things, but there's also an effect to our environment as well. But more and more humans choosing to move in that direction, there'll be business opportunities for people. So you're seeing more and more like vegan cheeses, nut milks, things like this, egg replacements, things that, normally you would use eggs for. They have other things instead. I've eaten plenty of food, vegan donuts, Boston cream donuts and carrot cake, even cheesecake. I've eaten vegan cheesecake, and man, it blew away anything that I've ever had from, other products. So there's plenty of options out there, and they're just getting more and more plentiful as people move in that direction, because there is still an effect to the environment and to our human body by relying on animals and things like leather and stuff like that. People describe veganism, they describe it more as a lifestyle rather than just a diet. It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. It's choosing not to involve animals in what you do. So like when I bought this new car that the students helped me to buy, one of the first questions I asked them is, what kind of interior does it have? And they said leather. And I said, what kind of leather? Is it actual leather, or is it fake leather? They said, oh no, it's fake leather. And I said, oh, okay. Right. So you would like to make decisions like that so that you're not impacting other beings. And that's what's going to allow your mind to be more loving and kind and compassionate. Mm-hmm. It's like Joe has a question. Mm-hmm.
All right, David. So if we can't kill the animals, then I'm from Illinois, where deer take over a lot of. You have to kill them, mm-hmm. or they're just going to take over.
Yeah, it's not about what you can't do, right? I'm not here giving you rules. I'm not here telling you what you can and can't do. Those are decisions for you to make. I'm just showing you the results of the decisions that we do make, right? So if we go out there and actively kill, then we're going to see results of that. So like here in Thailand, like they have all these dogs that are everywhere, like and there used to be a lot more than there are now. So rather than rounding them all up and taking them off and killing them somewhere, which the Thai government could totally do if they were interested in doing that, but they understand the natural law of karma. Instead, they've come around, they've collected up the animals, they take them to a veterinarian, they spay or neuter them, and then they bring them back to the community, let them live out their life. And then now there's less and less population of wild dogs, street dogs, right? So these are the things that we can do when we look at a situation and we try to figure out, what's the best way to approach this compassionately. And each situation is going to be a little bit different, and we don't have to resort to killing. Whereas if the Thai government came in and they collected up all these dogs and they took them off and killed them, what they're teaching the local population is that if something's happening that you don't like, just kill them. Right? So in those kinds of situations where like a country that we come from, where there's oftentimes a lot of wars throughout history, we can see that there's a lot of killing in our streets too. That because our leaders say, hey, we don't like what those people are doing over there, let's go kill them. And now in the streets of that population, those people have learned that from their leaders that, hey, if somebody's doing something that you don't like, just kill them. And now you see a high level of killing in the streets. Where here in Thailand, you don't see that. There's not very much murders in this country because the government, the leaders, they understand if they make decisions in that way, it's going to propagate that type of thinking in the population. And now you're going to see a lot of killing throughout the country. So this deer issue that you're talking about, scientists would need to look at it, compassionate people would need to look at it and see what's the best way to handle this situation so that we can create an environment where all beings can thrive. Rather than just thinking about ourselves and killing, let's figure out a way that all of these beings can thrive. And that's what the Thai government has figured out here with the street dogs, and it's working. And by the way, they've taken some of them and put them on a sanctuary. There's a sanctuary out in eastern Thailand. Apparently it has 8,000 dogs. I've never been there, but I read about it and I was like, wow, that must be an amazing place. 8,000 dogs all in one place. So these are the kinds of things that creatively, when you're living compassionately, and there's people that are willing to support that because they needed land and supplies and things like that. These are the kinds of creative solutions that people would be wise to come up with, and we'll see improved results by doing that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
Having recently worked at the largest veterinary hospital in Australia, I was made aware of the fact that, they advise that in the Buddhist culture they don't euthanize animals. So Western society, if your dog's elderly or seriously unwell, you'll take it to the vet and it'll be euthanized. So I was just wondering about that and whether that's, considering compassion, that's something that could be, euthanasia could be an option, or whether these people were so strict in their thinking, maybe that compassion, that wasn't an avenue.
Yeah, they have euthanasia here in Thailand, but you very rarely, see it being used because they understand that killing this being doesn't solve anything. All too often in the Western world, if an individual has a pet, if this pet is sick, the person is having painful feelings because of their attachment to this pet, and they don't want to see it be sick. And instead, they're choosing to use the killing. We call it euthanasia because it makes it sound better, but what we're really doing is we're intentionally killing this animal because the person's feelings are painful, and they think the way to get past this is to hurry up and kill this animal so I can get past my painful feelings, rather than just let it live its life out. If it's sick for 3 months or 6 months or a year, then that's the karma of that animal. That's the results of its decisions. The problem that this being is experiencing isn't that it's sick. That's not the actual problem. The problem is that this being is stuck in the cycle of rebirth, and it keeps coming back over and over and over and over again. And the best way to live compassionately for it is let it to live out its life, and then it experiences the most amount of unwholesome karma it can experience in that life. And then it has an opportunity to be reborn in a better existence with an improved opportunity to get to enlightenment and escape this whole cycle of rebirth. So the Thai people understand this. So they're very unlikely to kill an animal. They just don't do those kinds of things. You don't see, hunting in Thailand. Very rarely do you see these kinds of things occurring. That's why you don't see murders in this country very frequently. Very rare that you see those kinds of things. So they're doing this because they understand the cycle of rebirth. They understand the mind. They understand craving and anger and hatred. They understand the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, that if we kill, then this is going to produce harmful results in our community. So they choose not to do this. But in the West, we don't have the same understanding. So we tend to resort to these kinds of things. And the human being typically thinks they're solving their painful feelings by killing the animal. Sometimes they're justifying it as they think it's a compassionate killing because they think that the animal is suffering, and if we kill it, then that'll make it better for the animal. But if you understand the cycle of rebirth, you understand you're not actually making it better for the animal. You're actually making it worse because now it hadn't lived out all of its karma from that life, and now it's going to need to be reborn more in order to get to a better existence and escape the cycle of rebirth.
Having watched that process. I think it's more the professionals and the veterinarians that are saying, okay, you now have to euthanize this pet because it's in pain, not so much the owners saying, this is a discomfort for me, but there seems to be this pressure from veterinarians to want to euthanize animals.
Yeah, there's definitely that recommendation because they're not knowledgeable in these things as well. And there's also a certain financial component too, right? That they're going to get paid more by doing this particular service potentially. So this is where it comes down to your individual decisions. But see, the natural law of Gamma there is oftentimes when people euthanize their animal, they feel guilty for a really long time afterwards, and they feel shameful. They feel even deeper sadness that they've done this. Where one time I had a student contact me that her animal was sick, and she asked me what she should do. She was in America, and she said that they recommended to euthanize the animal. And I explained all of this to her. And ultimately, she decided on her own because the doctors told her that her animal was going to live for like 2 weeks tops, something like that. And I said, okay, well, here's how I would handle it. And she ultimately ended up not euthanizing the animal. It lived for like a year and a half. It actually regained its health after like 2 or 3 months, and it lived an entire year of healthy living before it actually died itself. Whereas if she would have euthanized it, she would have cut off that year and a half of extra life that it had. So she was thankful that she had learned this, and she didn't follow the doctor's advice. So that's where it always comes down to our own decision making, and we need to know what's wise or unwise for ourselves. And even though this person's in a white jacket and they have a certain education, that we shouldn't just think that they are the end all be all, and they just make our decision that we feel that is best for us, even if it's contrary to popular belief and what people tend to do. Mm-hmm. That's why I was mentioning to you guys, like a person who's on the path to enlightenment, an enlightened being, they're not going to conform to society. They're not going to conform to what others do. That's where you need to know the wisdom of what's wise and unwise. And typically you'll make decisions very differently than the people around you. And they might be having an issue with it, but that's their issue. That's their anger and their frustration. You just need to know what's wise. Okay.
David, one last,
Yeah.
sorry, just a quick question.
See.
Consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We know that laws have defined that in some, for many countries, but here, how do you define it? Is it the movement?
The consciousness?
Yes.
It's the mind.
But like, for example, once the egg and sperm come together, and again, then you have an embryo. Mm-hmm. Is the embryo, again, certain religions will all say the embryo has consciousness, some don't. Yeah. How do we define consciousness here?
I see. The Buddha talks about all three of these things coming together at the same time. So he talks about, in order for there to be a living being that comes into existence, he describes it this way. He says the woman needs to be in season, that there needs to be a union between a man and a woman, and then there needs to be a consciousness. And when all three of those things come together, he talks about it as happening at conception. That you have that essentially what he's talking about is the egg, the sperm, and the consciousness or the mind coming together at conception. And he says, okay, this is how a being comes into existence as a human being. Proliferation of life, husband and wife coming together, and you want to have a child. Well, when he talks about he says the woman has to be in season, which means that her egg is being released, right? That's what he's basically talking about. And then he says the union of woman and man, which means they're having sex and their sperm that's coming from the man. And then the third component is the consciousness itself. And that's what he says, okay, now these things have come together and now we have this human being that is, we would call an embryo. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to move to the second precept. This one's very straightforward. It says, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given without stealing. Okay. So if we're going to steal something from somebody, there's a certain craving in our mind. There's a longing, yearning. We want this thing and we're not interested in working to get it ourselves. So we're stealing from it, right? So now whenever we're making decisions based in craving, it's going to produce unwholesome results. And there's also a certain amount of ill will, because when we steal something from somebody, they're not going to be able to use that thing. And it's coming from our ignorance or unknowing of true reality. So if I stole somebody's car, that's coming from my craving, my anger, and my ignorance. And now I've caused harm to this person, and this harm is going to come back to me, because now this person can't go to work, they can't go to the store and buy basic necessities for themselves, or if they have children, they can't take their children to school, right? Perhaps, right? So now I've caused harm to this individual, and now this harm is going to come back to me. You can't cause someone else to be discontent, but you can cause them harm. Causing someone harm is to cause harm to their material possessions, to their physical body, or to their reputation. And whenever you're causing harm to those things, this harm is going to come back to you. So stealing something from someone, you're causing harm to their material possessions. You're now taking it for yourself. And it's based in craving, anger, and ignorance. So that's why the Buddha teaches us not to steal, because those kinds of things are all going to come back to harm us. But then it's important to understand that it's unwise to assume that something can be used, right? Say that I was a college student and I was turning in a paper to my professor, and maybe they're out of the classroom, and I saw the stapler on their desk, and I pick up the stapler and I start stapling my paper to hand it in, and now the professor walks in. It's like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler. Right? Maybe they're attached to their stapler. They don't want to share it with anybody. Now they get angry, they get frustrated because they're not getting what they want, which is their stapler to be on their desk. And now they get so angry, and they're attributing those feelings to me. They think I'm the one who's causing them to be angry. Now they might fail me on that paper, or they might fail me in the entire class. They're so angry, right? Where what I could have done is I could have waited for the professor to come back in, and I could have said, hey, professor, do you mind if I use your stapler? And they're going to either say yes or no. And if they say no, I'll just go get one from somewhere else, or I'll go buy one myself, or go to another professor, another classroom, right? So it would be unwise to just assume that something could be used, right? So the Buddha is explaining to you to await what is given. And part of that is not assuming that something can be used or taken. So he's saying here, accepting what is given, right? So this is like if somebody's making you an offering, if someone's giving you a gift, he teaches you to accept it, right? Because that person who's practicing generosity, it's enhancing the quality of their mind. So if someone's offering you something and you're like, no, I don't want that, right? You're shutting down their generosity and the opportunity for them to enhance the quality of their mind. And if they do that, if you do that enough, people will stop offering things to you because they're not interested in continuing to offer things to you. So if grandma at Christmas time gives you this sweater that you know you'll never absolutely ever wear, the Buddha teaches you to accept it, right? And now you have this sweater, you can give it to someone else, right? You can just offer to someone else. That's your generosity, right? If grandma gets angry that you've given it to somebody else, well, you didn't cause that anger. That was grandma's craving, desire, attachment. That was her wants and expectations. She was expecting you to wear it. Because the other option would be to put it in your closet and just let it sit there, waste away, and rot, right? And no one's getting use of it. So if you give it to somebody else, maybe it goes through 6, 8, 10 different hands, and eventually it finds someone that says, this is the most beautiful sweater I have ever seen in my entire life. I'm going to wear it every single day, right? So, wow, look at all these 10 people that practice generosity and train their mind to let go. This was beautiful. In some cultures, they call this re-gifting, right? And they think it's a bad thing. No, it needs to find the hands of somebody that's going to actually enjoy it and use it, right? You haven't done anything wrong by passing it along. So the Buddha is teaching you to accept what is given. But remember, these teachings aren't black and white. You need to move to a higher consciousness, right? He's not saying always accept everything that's given. That's not what he's saying. Because if someone tried to give you crystal methamphetamine, heroin, or cocaine, are you going to accept what is given? No, right? If someone tries to give you a stolen car, are you going to accept what is given? No, right? So you need to use your higher consciousness and make a decision about whether it would be wise for you to accept this thing or not, right? So it's not black and white. You need to be able to see all the variables involved. And that goes for this one too, awaiting what is given. Here in a situation where maybe you have a life partner, right? And maybe they're going on a trip. The Buddha teaches you to await what is given. Don't load them up with a bunch of expectations and try to say, hey, give me this and give me this and give me this and give me that. Because now you're burdening that person with all these things and they're running around town trying to find what it is that you want. And then if they bring you back what you want, you're happy. And if they don't bring you back what you want, you're angry and frustrated, right? So in this situation, the Buddha says it would be unwise. And then the same thing, again, what if your partner says to you, hey, I'm going to this place. Would you like me to get you something? Right? I've had students do that. They've come here and they said, hey, David, I'm going back to the USA. Is there anything that I can bring you? In this situation, they're practicing generosity. I'm awaiting what is given. I haven't put the expectation on them to bring me anything. They're offering it to me, right? And now I can make a decision, what I say in this situation, right? And the same thing with this one about assuming something could be taken or used. Say that I was out in my neighborhood and I had a neighbor who was doing some yard work and they cut their arm and they're bleeding profusely out of their arm and they're going to die, right? Well, maybe my other neighbor has a fabric on their front porch that I could grab it and put a tourniquet on their arm and save their life, right? Am I going to ring the doorbell, wait, knock, 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 knock? Hey, neighbor, excuse me, there's a guy over here bleeding out. He's going to die any second now. Do you mind if I borrow your fabric here? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to grab the fabric, go over there, wrap up a tourniquet, get this person in the ambulance headed to the hospital. Then, because I understand this precept, I understand this natural law, I'm going to go back to the neighbor. Ding dong. Hey, neighbor, so sorry. I apologize. I used a fabric that was on your porch. I'm really sorry about this. Our other neighbor was sick and, they had a cut and I put a tourniquet on their arm. I'd like to compensate you for this fabric. Can I give you some money for this? Or can you tell me where you bought it from and I'll actually go get one for you? Right? You're going to make amends with this situation. So the Buddha's not teaching you something black and white here. He's just helping you to understand the natural law. So if you've grabbed that fabric off the porch, you know that it's important to go back and talk to that person and make amends for this so that you can now save this person's life and take care of your neighbor whose fabric that you just took. So it's important that you don't see these things as black and white and you see the gray area. So do you guys have any questions on this one? Yeah, you guys can ask anything you like. No need to ask me if you can ask a question.
I know you talked quite a bit about karma, and I've always had a bit of a roadblock when it comes to karma. So, for example, let's say if somebody, I don't know, robs a bank, for example, they rob a bank, and that's going to affect people. I get that, but then they go off and fly off into the sunset, and then live somewhere nice, and then they have all the, they use the money they used to rob from the bank, and they live on that beautiful island and have a luxurious life. And I understand about the karmic consequences, but some people might say, look at that person, they've done something really bad, but they're not paying for what they did. Or on the other hand, if somebody, when we talk about karma, maybe I struggle with this. If there's somebody who is, let's say, they appear to be a really good person and they've lived a nice life and they've been kind to others, and then they suffer in some terrible way, they have an accident or something happens to them, and you think, wow, why did that happen to that person? They didn't deserve that. And so there's that contrast, and I understand the idea of karma and cause and effect, but sometimes it just, to my mind, it doesn't seem fair, and I struggle with that.
Yeah, that's because you don't understand the natural law of karma 100% yet. Tomorrow, I'm going to be teaching you that, so we'll talk about it tomorrow, and you'll be able to understand it in more detail. I can assure you that nobody is running and hiding from their karma, and that person that you think is so good, that's experiencing something unwholesome, they've made decisions that led to that, but we'll talk about it tomorrow in our class. There's just certain things you don't have wisdom of right now that you can learn tomorrow. Okay, so let me just check online if we have any questions here. Okay, I am not seeing any questions. So let's move to the third precept. Remember, these are the words of the Buddha. Here he says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. Okay, so what he's talking about here is sexual conduct that would cause harm. And he's advising you not to cause harm through your sexual activity. Because if you're causing harm through your sexual activity, this harm will come back to you. And you're going to need to be able to understand what those harms could be and how to practice in a way that you're not causing harm. Yes, sir, you need me? You need me? Yeah? You have my thing? Sorry, this is the gentleman that I bought the car from, and he had to take it to go get it registered today. You have my... Okay, let's see. Your car has now passed the inspection. Okay, I've already returned it to the temple. Your documents will take about 2 more days to complete the registration process. Once the registration is done, I'll return the documents to you. The license plate should be ready in about 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, thank you. I returned the car to you. I'm in the temple now. Oh, okay. Okay, kapun kap home. Okay, so they took my car to go get it taken care of. He said I was his first foreign client, so he had to do some extra steps to get my car registered.
Sorry, David. I know we're talking about this, but something you mentioned over the past few days about, if you do something against karma, something bad will come back. So when the gentleman just came by and he was showing you that everything was fine, I just mentioned to Simon, oh, that's good karma. So what immediately came up is sometimes we stumble, fall, and blow a gasket in our speech to someone because it wasn't going the way we anticipated, just as you had mentioned several times. After you do that and you get this terrible sense of guilt, is that some of the bad karma that's coming back, and you're realizing that's a learning point now and then trying to come back?
Yeah. Okay. Those conditioned feelings that you get, the guilt and the shame and the fear, that's your part of your unwholesome karma, showing you that your mind is not yet awake and you still have craving, anger, and ignorance in your mind. That's like the red light on the dashboard of your car alerting you that, hey, there's something wrong here and you need to investigate this and you need to figure it out. Because you wouldn't drive a car around with a red light on the dashboard. You're going to get it checked out and fixed. But we don't see the discontentedness that way. Oftentimes in the unenlightened state, we blame it on other people. But when you start understanding that that is coming from your own mind, you realize that, oh my goodness, that's a flashing red light on my dashboard. I need to figure that out. And if you can't figure out what your cravings are, or if you couldn't figure out what's wrong with your car, you would take it to a mechanic. In this case, you take your mind to your teacher and you're like, hey, teacher, I can't figure out what's my cravings here. Why am I so frustrated in this situation? And then if we help you 2 or 3 times, you'll build that skill for yourself that you can see your own mind more clearly.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so I just read this for you, which is all about sexual misconduct. Okay, so here, I'm going to break it down for you. The Buddha here talking about abandoning sexual relations with people who are protected by their family. What he's talking about there is having sex with minors. If we had sex with 8-year-olds, 12 years old, people like this, they're still developing with their parents. And you probably remember the first time you had sex is very impactful for you. And having sex with a minor can affect that individual in a negative way. And it can cause harm in this person's life. And that's why the Buddha is teaching you not to do that. And in most places in the world, it's also matching in the human laws. The human laws in most places have laws against this kind of stuff, but there's some places in the world that don't have that. It's actually legal that you're not going to encounter going to prison or anything like that by having sex with an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or anything like this. But if you look at those societies, you can see the natural law of karma at play because their political system is very unstable. Their economy is very unstable, having a lot of difficulty. Their educational educational system is having a lot of difficulties, and you can see that people aren't growing and developing in this society, in this population, as another more developed society. So you can see these kinds of effects from the natural law of karma. So the Buddha is teaching us not to have sex with minors. Here where he's saying whose violation entails a penalty, what he's saying there is not having sex without consent, right? Because if we didn't have consent, we would be forcing someone or raping somebody. And now there's going to be a penalty as a result. And the cause and effect here, just like I shared with the cause and effect with having sex with minors, the cause and effect here is that you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can go to jail, you can get diseases and illnesses by forcing somebody to have sex with you, right? You can have all kinds of difficulties. Here where the Buddha says abandoning unchastity, this is having sex with multiple partners. I'll share with you guys what chastity is if you don't know what chastity is, because then you'll understand what unchastity is. In ancient times, fathers used to put metal underwear on their daughters, and they had a lock and key, and it was only the father that had the lock and key, or had the key to this lock. So I can't imagine walking around as a woman with metal underwear, but people used to do it, right? So that would be chastity. That's like having no sex with anybody, right? Father has the key. Nobody's having sex with my daughter until I unlock these metal underwear, right? Well, unchastity would be just the opposite. That would be having sex with everybody and anybody, right? Having sex with lots of partners. The reason why the Buddha is teaching you to eliminate that is because there's unwholesome results as part of that. If we go out and have sex with lots of people, that's why we get sexually transmitted diseases. And some of those can actually be fatal. And if you're also having sex with lots of people, those people oftentimes get attached, and they're attached to you. And now you end up getting beat up or murdered and fights and arguments. You lose your wealth. You have all kinds of problems in these kinds of situations. You can lose your reputation in the community. So that's why the Buddha is teaching you that. But some places, this part where it says sex with minors, and not having sex with people who are protected by their family, in some places you might actually be part of your culture where you meet somebody and then you talk to your parents and you say, hey, can this person move in? I would like to have a relationship with this person, and we'd like to get married, but we don't have enough money to buy our own house. Can we live here? And your family might say, sure, come on in. You guys can move in. So in this situation, you're still practicing this precept because your family has accepted the fact that you guys are living there, right? So I just kind of bring that up because some cultures have that. That's not what the Buddha is talking about here with individuals who are, having that are protected by their family. This part here where the Buddha is saying who are protected by teachings, that's for people who have decided to remain celibate. If someone's decided to no longer have sex and you were to try to lure them out of that, away from that, that's causing harm to that person and to the community at large, right? Because in order to get to enlightenment, you can get to the second stage of enlightenment and still be having a sexual relationship. But if you'd like to get to the third or fourth stage of enlightenment, ultimately you're going to need to eliminate sexual contact. If or when you choose to do that, it's a choice for you to make. Nobody's ever going to tell you to do it or force you to do it, but you're going to see that you're not going to be able to get to permanent peace and permanent joy as long as you have sexual craving in your mind. Because in some cases, you're going to get sex and you'll be happy with that. In other situations, you can't have sex and you'll be agitated and frustrated. So ultimately, the way to eliminate that and get to the peace is to eliminate sexual craving out of your mind. And there are certain teachings and guidance to be able to help you do that. Oftentimes when people are young or they're still having sex, they'll do all the things they can do to get to that second stage of enlightenment, and they'll kind of hang out there and continuing to do all the other work on the path. And then at some point when they see their mind becoming more and more peaceful and they're interested to get to the fourth stage, they will just continue to move beyond that. So you could actually do all the other work on the path to enlightenment, have a very peaceful life, except for around sex. You're going to still be agitated. You're going to still be frustrated whenever you can't have sex. So you can hang out there at that second stage of enlightenment for whatever amount of time that you would like. And then if or when you ever decide to move beyond it, that's an option for you to make. But the people who have decided to move beyond that, If you're choosing to have sex with them, it's causing harm to that person. If you're trying to lure them away from their vow of celibacy. And it's also causing harm to the wider community, because the very best thing that could ever happen for you is to get to enlightenment. That peace and that joy that you experience in the enlightened mental state is actually better than sex. I know that's hard for you guys to imagine right now, that there's something better than sex, but there is. It's called enlightenment, right? So this individual getting to enlightenment is the very best thing for that person to ever experience, is getting to enlightenment. So luring that person away from their celibacy is causing harm to that person. But then also, if that person did get to enlightenment, they would have the wisdom to help many other people to be able to get to enlightenment. So it's causing harm to the wider community. So that's why the Buddha teaches you that for people who are celibate, not to choose to have sex with them. So here in Thailand, they make this really easy for you, that people who wear orange robes and shave their hair and stuff like this, they're choosing not to have sex. So you would just know not to have sex with this person and find somebody who's, choosing to have sex. Also here in Thailand, people who wear white and shave their hair, if they do that every single day, they're also choosing to not have sex. So I don't have sex anymore. I haven't had sex for quite a while. And I wear all white, but I'm not doing it because I'm advertising to other people that I don't have sex and to not have sex with me. I wear these clothes for other reasons, but just understand that people who wear all white and shave their hair are typically not having sex. So that's not someone that you would be interested in approaching for that type of relationship. So Thailand makes it really easy for you with that. People who are involved in committed relationships or sex outside of any relationship you're committed to, that would be unchastity. That would also be having sex with someone who's in an existing relationship, who have a husband, wife, or partner, or someone who's been garlanded as a partner, as a man, woman, or partner, right? So in these situations, if you've ever done this or known people that have done this, they've gotten beat up, they've gotten murdered, their material possessions can be damaged or destroyed. You can lose your wealth. You can lose your reputation in the community. That's the cause and effect. So this is where you can see that it's not rules, it's not commandments. The Buddha is helping you to get rid of this craving, this anger, and this ignorance, so that now you can make wiser and wiser decisions about how you interact in the world. So that's what he's helping you to see there. People who are human trafficked, they're usually being forced to have sex, possibly for money. In these kinds of environments, entering into them, if you chose to do that, you could get robbed, you could get beat up, you could get murdered, you could get sexually transmitted diseases. Same thing up here if you're having sex outside of certain relationships. Again, sexually transmitted diseases. This is all the unwholesome gamma associated with not understanding this precept and not practicing it closely. Same thing with paid sexual services. Even if somebody was consenting to that and it was their choice to offer those paid sexual services, once again, entering into that environment, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can lose your wealth from doing these kinds of things. That's all the results of having done that. It's important to understand that same gender relationships aren't causing harm. That's why you don't see it here. The Buddha was aware of it, but he didn't talk about it in this particular precept because it's not causing any harm. There's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex with each other, and they haven't caused harm to anybody at all. So if you're someone who prefers same gender relationships, or you know someone who does, this is completely normal. There's never been a time in history where all individuals had sex with the opposite gender. That would be permanence. We understand the universal truth of impermanence, that not everybody has sex with the opposite gender, because if they did, that would be permanence, and we wouldn't have the universal truth of impermanence. So you can understand that you're completely normal, or your friends are completely normal that have sex with the same gender. There's no harm in that whatsoever. Now, other people, they have craving, where they crave everybody to have sex with the opposite gender. And when they don't get their craving fulfilled, their anger is arising and they have ill will towards people who prefer same-gender relationships. And then where is that coming from? Their ignorance, their unknowing of true reality. They don't understand the universal truth of impermanence. So if other people are getting angry based on your decisions, you're not causing that. You're not causing any harm. That's that person that's experiencing that. And then we can also understand transgender individuals through the teachings of the Buddha. This is completely normal too. That if you have a human body that has one set of sexual organs, then you've got the mind that identifies completely different, right? You could have male sexual organs and the mind identifies as female, or you could have female sexual organs and the mind identifies as male. If you understand the universal truth of impermanence, once again, you understand it's not possible for every physical body to have a mind that identifies as the same gender. Because if that was the case, that would be permanence, right? And if you understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been different beings in the past, somebody could have been female, 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 and now that mind is ending up in a male body, right? Or the other way around, male, 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 now that mind's ending up in a female body, right? And now this individual is identifying as a gender different than what the sexual organs of the physical body is. This is normal, right? There's never been a time in history where everybody identified with the same gender as their sexual organs. So if you're someone who's transgender or you know people that are, it's completely normal, right? And we can understand it through these natural laws that the Buddha taught. Sometimes people ask me about masturbation because they've been taught, like, never masturbate. It's horrible. It's immoral. It's going to take you to hell or something like this. This isn't true, right? It really depends on how you're using masturbation. Masturbation can be helpful in some situations, but it can also be harmful in other situations too. It really depends on how you're using it and what you're doing. If you're decreasing your sensual desire, it's actually quite beneficial for you. But if it's increasing, it's actually causing harm to your own mind. First of all, you're not causing harm to other beings by masturbating because there's no one else involved. It's only you, right? So you're not causing harm to other beings. So let me share this with you, that as you're eliminating sensual desire, as you're eliminating your craving for sex, you might need a bit of masturbation to help you. Let's just say somebody's listening to this and they have 5 or 10 different boyfriends or girlfriends. And they're like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be doing this. I should bring this down to just one person. But yet they have all this sexual craving in their mind, and now they come down to one partner. Well, maybe they use a bit of masturbation to help them reduce their sexual craving and now start having sex with just one partner. That was beneficial because they went from 10 partners down to 1, and now they're having a much better life. So they use some masturbation to help them decrease their sensual desire, their craving for sex, and now they're practicing something better, which is just having one partner. Right? So this could be potentially helpful. Or let's just say like somebody wanted to go rape somebody and now they decide to use some masturbation instead. Wow, that was really helpful in that situation, right? Or you could have another situation where somebody's, say, masturbating excessively, say 10, 15, 20 times a day. They're watching pornography and masturbating. In this situation, their sensual desire is increasing, and now it's causing harm to their own mind, right? So it's not about whether you do it or not. It's about what's going on with your mind, and are you decreasing your sensual desire, or are you increasing it? So if you ever are familiar with a dam, they have these large multi-million-dollar structures where they have a dam that's holding back water. When the water is rising up on the dam more and more and more, it's putting pressure on the dam. The way that they protect the dam is they let the water out. They open up the dam and they let the water flow. And this protects the multi-million-dollar structure so that it doesn't deteriorate and fall apart. Your mind is going to be very similar. That as you're letting go of craving, desire, attachment, you're going to notice the pressure building up in your mind. So as you're maybe one day choosing to eliminate sexual craving, you might notice a lot of pressure building up in your mind where you just want to have sex really, really bad. Well, if you give in to that, you're not necessarily walking towards enlightenment. So what you could do is you could use a little bit of masturbation to knock that down, right? So you could go maybe 1 or 2 weeks without having sex. You feel the pressure building up in your mind. Use a little bit of masturbation, release that pressure. Now maybe you go 3 or 4 weeks without sex, and now you maybe need a little bit of masturbation to help out with that. And now that releases the pressure out of your mind. Now you go 6 or 8 or 10 weeks without any kind of sexual contact. So in this situation, masturbation can actually be helpful. So it really depends on how you're using it, whether you're increasing your sensual desire or you're decreasing it. And only you are going to know what it is that you're actually doing. Sex with animals is one of the few things that is black and white. An animal can't give us consent. And I imagine if somebody tried to have sex with an animal, there'd be illness and disease, and there could be injuries and all kinds of other things in this situation. So that would be an unwise thing. Pornography is something that sometimes people get into now. This can be very addictive for the mind. Oftentimes an individual is looking for intimacy with a partner, and they're maybe not able to do that for whatever reason, and they go in the direction of pornography. The mind getting down into that fantasy world, oftentimes it can get very addicted to that, and it's really hard to come out of it. And even when you do come out of it, having sex with a real live partner sometimes doesn't feel as fulfilling, because it's not the same as this fantasy world that the mind has been in for a certain period of time. So if somebody was interested in intimacy, I would suggest that you go towards a real live partner, and that's a better option than going towards pornography, because if your mind gets addicted to that, it'll be hard to get out of it. So do you guys have any questions on this particular precept? Yep.
David, considering sperm is made of egg, or it's sperm, it's alive, it's a consciousness, so it's murder.
A sperm doesn't have a consciousness. It doesn't have all 5 aggregates.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It has physical form, but that's it.
So you spoke about you spoke about unchastity, right? So if two people are in a relationship, and one or either has sex outside of that relationship, then that's not a good thing. But what about what about the issue of consent? So if those two people are in a relationship and they have an open relationship, for example, and they do whatever they want, but with somebody who's not somebody outside of the relationship, who's not in a committed relationship, then where would the harm be there? Because everybody would be in agreement. And I know you also spoke about the harm it would cause, but two people in a relationship, there could be negative consequences if that's an abusive partner or something like that.
Yeah, even in a situation where the 2 people have agreed or 3 people have agreed, they're still going to experience the unwholesome results, because just the fact that these people have agreed to be in an open relationship doesn't circumvent the natural law of Gamma. Because in this situation, these people that are having sex with multiple partners, there can be jealousy, there can be envy, there can still be sexually transmitted diseases, because it's not just those 3 people typically. They're probably having sex with lots of other people too. So people can get possessive, people can get angry. These relationships are not typically very harmonious. There's kind of like this veneer on the relationship, like, okay, we're doing something that is good, that we're letting each other go and have sex with other people, but they're still experiencing the results of the decisions in the unwholesome Gamma, that they can get sexually transmitted diseases, there can be jealousy and envy that's arising, people can be pulling each other in opposite directions, there's oftentimes not as much trust and faithfulness and commitment in the relationships. These relationships really struggle that are having these kinds of situations. So you can't circumvent the natural law of Gamma by just agreeing to something. They're still going to experience the unwholesome results of that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go to the next one, which is number 4. Abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a truth speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. So the Buddha is teaching you not to lie here, right? Because if you lie, people are going to discover those lies and they're going to figure it out. And then they're not going to see you as being trustworthy and dependable and reliable. And this is going to affect you in your personal and professional life. Because say you have a certain profession and the boss wants to staff you on a project. They're like, oh, no, that person isn't very trustworthy, because they know that there's been many lies that have been discovered, right? And then also, if you're doing a lot of lying to different people, your mind's going to have to obsessively figure out what you said to one person versus versus another versus another. Whereas if you just speak the truth, you don't have to worry about that. You can just always speak the truth, and you don't have to worry about what you said from one person to the next, right? So this is going to help you to get to that peaceful and joyful mental state and a peaceful and joyful life when you're just speaking the truth. The Buddha understood this so well that I included this other teaching here for you, where he's teaching his son. Sometimes people think that the Buddha abandoned his family and never came back, but he came back. His wife, his son, his stepmother, his family members kept ordaining with him. They came to learn with him. Here he's teaching his son that it would be unwise to tell a lie even as a joke. Right now, you might not associate a Buddha as someone who tells a joke, but a Buddha tells a joke, right? They're funny, right? They have a good time. They have charisma. They have a grand, wonderful time. Oftentimes, when you see the pictures of the Buddha, he's looking very solemn and serious. And this might be what you think of an enlightened being. Enlightened beings are cheerful. They're bright. They're glad. They're having fun. So the Buddha did all those kinds of things. He had fun. Can you imagine learning to get to this mental state and you're stiff and serious all the time? Nobody's interested in that, right? You'd like to have fun and enjoy life. And that's what an enlightened being does. And that's what a Buddha does. They have a personality. They have a character. They tell jokes. But the difference is that an enlightened being and also a Buddha, they're going to tell jokes that are truthful. These jokes actually are a lot more challenging to pull off because you need to think about them and develop them more. But oftentimes people laugh at them more because they are so well crafted, right? So you don't need to joke in degrading and disparaging ways. Sometimes that's the way people joke, or they tell lies that are jokes. If you start learning how to tell truthful jokes, initially it'll be a bit challenging for you, but then over time it'll get easier and easier. So I suggest that you practice this all the way to the level that the Buddha did, which is he didn't even tell a joke that had a lie in it. Because if you can imagine this person teaching in classes like this, helping people understand the natural law of karma, saying all this truth, sharing all this truth, but on the side, if he was lying, even as a joke, people wouldn't be able to trust his words of whether or not he's telling the truth or not. So by telling the truth in all parts of your life, people know whenever this person talks, they're going to tell the truth, and they have no doubt about that whatsoever. Whereas if you're telling lies inside your jokes, people are going to doubt when you're actually being serious and you're telling the truth. They're going to doubt that. So if you just get in the practice of always telling the truth, this is going to promote much better relationships for you, and you're going to have much more success in your personal and professional life. So do you guys have any questions on this one?
David, so the quote at West Point is, you shall not lie, steal, or cheat, or tolerate those who don't. Mm-hmm. That second part of the phrase of tolerating those who, or tolerating those who do, what is the advice or the takeaways knowing that someone has lied? Mm-hmm. What should someone do?
So that part where you said tolerate people who do, that's not part of the teachings of the Buddha. If you've seen that associated with him, it's not part of what he taught. You might have seen it other places. Because if you're not tolerating something, that means you have a craving, an expectation for it to be done a different way. And now when somebody does that thing, now you get frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So if somebody else has lied, and I know that they've lied, or let me just say it this way. If someone else has said something that I think is a lie and it's impactful to my life, typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up with them and ask them questions, because maybe I think it's a lie, but it's really not. Maybe there's just some part of this that I don't understand. So I'm typically going to ask them questions. I'm like, hey, by the way, you mentioned this the other day. Can you help me understand this or that or this or that? And maybe what I find out is I was just confused and I didn't understand the full picture. Maybe I'm assuming that they lied, but they didn't really lie. So assuming something, the Buddha calls it clinging to a perception. Your perception is your views and opinions, and you're not interested in clinging to it. So the way that you ensure that you're not clinging to a perception is you ask people questions, and that way you don't assume anything. So like my son, if I get online, he does online school now. If I get online and it looks like he hasn't done his schoolwork, rather than just assume that the online system is correct, I will go to him and I will ask him, hey, have you done your schoolwork? And he might say, yeah, I've already finished. I'm playing some video games. Oh, really? Can you show me? Right? Because I would like to see the evidence. So then he pulls it up on his dad. Oh, there it is. He's done it. He's already done. My system is showing me that he hasn't done it, but maybe his system is showing me that he has. So because of impermanence, you don't know what's happened somewhere. So you never would like to assume anything. So the best thing to do is to follow up and ask questions, but don't accuse them of lying in that situation. Make sure that you follow up and that you don't cling to your perceptions or assume. Now, if there's someone who's regularly lying in my life, if these are impactful things to me, then I will probably kind of slowly distance myself from that person so that their decision to lie doesn't impact me. If their decisions to lie don't impact me, then I'll just know like, hey, this is somebody that I can't give my car keys to in order to go drive my car around to get it registered for license plate. I'm going to not trust this person because they've shown me that they're not trustworthy. So I might still continue to associate in this environment, but I'm not going to rely on them for anything. And in most cases, I would just move away. So I don't have anybody in my life that lies at this point. In the past I would have, but not anymore. Like people that I interact with are all telling the truth. So you don't have to convince that person of something. You don't have to tell them that they're lying. You don't have to force or control them to stop lying. You just make decisions to ensure that their decisions aren't impacting you. And that's what you would ultimately like to get to. Where oftentimes what we're taught is to go out into the world and convince other people to be a certain way or hold their nose to the fire or something like that. But you're going to just find yourself in massive conflicts, and it's just going to promote disharmony in your relationships. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we go to the last one. Okay, the last one here says refrain from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So remember, when you're investigating and examining the teachings of the Buddha, when you're studying his teachings, you're going to need to examine things. You're going to need to investigate things. So when you see this word heedlessness, you might not know what it means. Right? So when you're studying his teachings right away, it's like, let me figure out what this word means. So if you don't know what this word means, I didn't know what it meant either. I kind of assumed I knew what it meant, but you're not interested in assuming, right? You need to investigate and examine so you know the truth and you have wisdom. So if you look this word up, what it means is careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, and unmindful. So what he's teaching you is not to put any substances into the body. That's essentially taking your mind in the opposite direction of enlightenment. Because as you remember from the Eightfold Path yesterday, you're going to need mindfulness. You're going to need awareness of mind. Whereas if you are taking a substance that is producing unmindfulness, how can you ever purify your mind knowing what are the wholesome qualities and unwholesome qualities to be able to apply right effort if your mind's heedless? Right? So the Buddha is teaching you not to take substances that were called heedlessness. And he's speaking this way intentionally because he could have never imagined all the substances that we would have come up with, right? This is a way of teaching timelessly, right? He wouldn't have known about LSD or PCP. These are chemical-based things that he would have never imagined that we would have created because they didn't exist during his lifetime. But if there's any substance now or long into the future that produces heedlessness, you can know that it's unwise to take it, because it's going to cause your mind to have unattentiveness, be careless, thoughtless, and unmindful. And if your mind is in that condition, you're more likely to kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, and to lie. Right? If you go visit a prison and you talk to those individuals, they might tell you they're there for murder, or they might say they're there for robbing a bank. But if you're like, no, like, tell me, like, why are you really here? About 80% of them will tell you from substances, because they'll say, I never would have killed that person if I wasn't high on some drug. I would have never robbed that bank if I didn't have a habit that I was feeding. Right? So these substances actually lead to a whole lot of unwise decisions that are going to produce unwholesome results in your life. So you like to purge all of these things out of your life. And there's countless substances out there. And I've just put a few in here that we can talk about because it's not always black and white. Right? So like this first one, let's talk about this one, marijuana. Right? There's irrefutable evidence that this plant has medicinal purposes. There's children who have 20 seizures a day. They drop a little CBD oil on their tongue and they don't have another seizure for 6 months. Right? There's like irrefutable evidence that this plant has medical benefits, but it can also be used for heedlessness too, right? To get high. So if someone was going to choose to use this plant for medical benefits or a high, they're going to need to understand the difference, right? So the plant has CBD and THC. These are the two sides of the plant. The CBD is the medical properties and the THC is the properties that produce a high. So if somebody was interested in medical benefits, they're typically looking for a high CBD content and a very low THC. And they're usually going to ingest it through like an edible or an oil. Where someone who's looking for a high, they're going to typically look for a high THC, and now they might ingest it through smoking, perhaps, right? This is the way that sometimes people will ingest that, right? So only you are going to know whether you're taking this for a medical benefit or to have a high. So it can be used in both situations. If you're using this plant for stress or anxiety or anything like this, that's not going to solve your problem. That's not a true medical benefit to actually use this plant for, because the cause that's causing the stress and anxiety is craving, desire, attachment, the longing, the yearning, the wanting things to be a certain way. And there's no amount of smoking marijuana that is going to eliminate that out of the mind. So you need to be able to look at this closely and make a decision for yourself that's wise. Cigarettes, that's going to produce harmful effects to the body, and more people are figuring this out. There is no medical benefit with cigarettes, and that's why more and more people are moving off of cigarettes, because it's causing harm for their body. And it also causes harm to others through secondhand smoke as well, depending on the environment that you're smoking in. You're going to need to pay attention to prescription medications, because even some of these can be addictive. Whenever a doctor is prescribing you medicine, I suggest you research that medicine. If you don't know what it is, research it. Even if the doctor tells you, don't believe what people say. Research it yourself. You're living in the information age where you have information at your fingertips and you can research this medication yourself. And if you realize that this is an addictive medicine, you could actually ask your doctor, hey, is there another medicine that I could use instead of this one? And they might actually be able to offer you a different medicine. But what you might get occasionally is like, no, that's the only medication for this issue. And if you know that it's addictive, that's very helpful for you. That's good wisdom, because now when you're taking it, you'll try to get off of it as soon as possible so that you don't allow your mind to get addicted to it. So having wisdom about the medical prescriptions that you're having and that you're ingesting is going to help you make better informed decisions. So don't just believe this person in a white jacket. You need to do the research for yourself. What you're going to notice is caffeine is a substance that causes heedlessness. It's one that is mostly legal around the world, but it does cause heedlessness. It brings the mind up into an excited state. It's causing that unattentiveness or that lack of thoughtfulness. The mind can get in this excited state. And oftentimes people are doing that in order to get energy or to become awake in terms of their energy and their mind to be more alert, they think. But then when that substance isn't there, then they drop off and maybe they're tired and groggy. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will have sustainable energy all day long, where you don't get excited and you don't get tired and exhausted. You will still get sleepy, but you won't get exhausted or tired. If you rely on a substance like caffeine to lift you up and give you energy, you never actually allow the mind to produce the natural energy to sustain you all day long. So as long as you're relying on caffeine, you're not allowing the mind to develop its natural energy where you can have energy all day long. So this substance is causing harm within your own mind, and if or when you're ever ready, you would be wise to kind of purge this, and you might need to gradually move away from it. And as you do, you might actually go through withdrawal symptoms, and let that be a reminder to you that this is indeed a substance. You might have shakes, you might have headaches, you might have dry mouth, you might notice these kinds of things. You might be groggy and sleepy for a few weeks as your mind is picking up and having natural energy. So let that just remind you that you are detoxing from a substance, right? So when or if you ever choose to do that is your choice. You're going to need to also pay attention to your sugar intake. We kind of figure this out usually as kids, that too much sugar can produce a high. So even something like that can be affected to the mind. So you'd like to pay attention to that. Some people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to help you to get to enlightenment. This is a huge misunderstanding in the world. Psychedelics will create introspection. You will kind of be looking inward, and it kind of mimics some of the qualities that you need in order to actually get to enlightenment, but it's not going to help you to actually get to enlightenment. It's actually hindering you from getting to enlightenment, because that introspection that you need in order to be able to get to enlightenment and looking inward, you're going to need to develop that naturally so that you have it available to you at all times. Right? Like if you're talking to your mom and you're having a conversation and you need to be introspective, you can't be like, hey, Mom, let me go drop these magic mushrooms and I'll come back to you with an answer to that question. Right? You can't do that. Right? You got to be like, oh, I need to look inward and figure this out. Right? So you're not going to be able to drop magic mushrooms or LSD or any of this other stuff at will to get whatever insight that you need. You're going to need to be introspective at all times during your day. So if you take these kind of substances, you're not allowing your mind to cultivate that quality naturally. It's kind of like walking down the street and you're looking in at the stores and you see this amazing handbag, this amazing purse that's inside the store, and you'd like to go in there and check it out and touch it and feel it and maybe purchase it, but you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. You can see it, you can look at it, but you can't actually go in and touch it and feel it and make it yours. It's the same kind of thing, that you can kind of look at kind of what enlightenment and being introspective would look like, but you can't really have it for yourself as long as you're using these substances. So if you hear people say that psychedelic substances are helping you get to enlightenment, you can know that it's just the opposite, that it's hindering you from being able to cultivate the introspection that you really need in order to be able to move the mind closer and closer to enlightenment. So do you guys have any questions on this one? Yeah. You guys are the question class. There's always questions in this class. I should say, instead of saying, do you guys have questions? I should say, who has a question?
So to talk about caffeine, obviously we're in a good part of the world for coffee. But anyway, drinking coffee, I get the part about the caffeine and people relying on that caffeine buzz. But what about some medical experts say there are many benefits to drinking coffee that can, I'm not talking about the caffeine, there are other potential benefits from drinking coffee. So is it okay to, if you can drink coffee, but you don't feel that you're addicted to it, or you can just, you'll feel fine if you think, okay, I'm not drinking coffee today. Is that reason enough to continue? Would that be considered okay to continue drinking coffee in those circumstances?
One of the things that you're going to find is that the unenlightened mind is going to try to justify maintaining something in its life, and sometimes they'll point to things like this. Whatever health benefits that someone might think that they're getting from something like coffee, there's plenty of other ways to acquire those same benefits without having the caffeine. More and more people are becoming aware of this. I haven't tasted it yet, but I saw a mushroom coffee that doesn't have any caffeine whatsoever, and it's starting to become more and more popular. And there's other products like that out there, but you got to be careful with like decaf coffee, because they've done research and some decaf coffees actually have more caffeine than caffeinated coffee, because the decaffeination process isn't 100%. It's impermanent, right? So I wouldn't suggest that you ingest coffee at all, because that caffeine is affecting your mind. If somebody is truly not addicted to it, they should be able to let it go. And if they let it go, they're going to see their mind becomes more honed and more focused, and they're going to have more mindfulness. When you're putting the caffeine in your mind, it's going to take you away from the mindfulness. But someone needs to be able to see that for themselves. So if they get away from coffee, they'll see the quality of their mind improving, and then they'll appreciate that much more than this. Sometimes when we start talking about these kinds of things, like eliminating sex, eliminating coffee, people are like, oh, I don't want to lose my coffee, or I don't want to give up sex. One of the things that I share with people is you're not giving up anything other than the discontent feelings. You're actually gaining something, and that's the way you need to be able to look at it, is that you're gaining your peace, you're gaining your joy by choosing to move away from coffee. you're actually gaining more clarity of mind. So oftentimes we focus on, I'm losing this, or I'm eliminating this, or I'm giving this up. Actually, it's just the opposite. You're gaining something. And the more that you focus on what you're gaining, you'll be more than willing to let those kinds of things go. But it's going to be challenging because the mind is holding on to it and it's clinging. So I don't suggest that anybody use any of these substances. Of course, sugar, that can be in moderation, but these other things, and marijuana can be used for medical purposes like we talked about, but there's a lot more substances than I have up here. I'm just kind of giving you a few to talk about it, but each one of these, you need to look at it and make sure your mind's not trying to justify keeping it around just for some other reason, because it will oftentimes do that. The mind will oftentimes try to justify, like, oh, but coffee's good for antioxidants, and it's good for this and it's good for that, but I don't want to give that up. Well, okay, why don't you go get that over here or something else? No, I wanted it from this coffee, right? Because that's the attachment that the mind has, the craving. So I don't suggest that somebody ingest coffee, but of course, everybody's in a different place. I used to drink lots of coffee. So there's no judgment if somebody does drink a coffee. Like sometimes students bring coffee here. You guys would like to drink coffee? Go ahead. You're not hurting me. You're not offending me. You're not causing any issues for me. That's where you are in your practice right now. Drink your coffee. Students have even invited me to coffee shops before. They're like, hey, I would like to talk to you, have a private discussion. All right, cool. Where you would like me to meet you? Can you meet me at this coffee shop? Sure, I'll meet you there. Right? Like, you're not hurting me. You're not offending me. Or you're not doing anything to me. So no matter where you are in your practice, that's where you are now. But then over time, you can gradually decide on your own when or if you would like to let go of any of these particular things. And there's no judgment from me or other people because I've done all the things that you're doing and probably a lot more. That's the reason why this book's so thick, is because I've done all these things, right? And I know what the natural law of karma is. So anytime you guys are choosing to do any of these kinds of things, you can talk to me about anything you like, and there's no judgment whatsoever. And if you would like to drink coffee, go for it. But you will notice when you eliminate it, it's going to improve the clarity of your mind, and it's going to help you a lot. Questions? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is everything on this particular topic. What I'm going to do is pause for lunch, and we usually break at 12:30. So we're only 17 minutes over, 17 minutes over. That's it. Wow, that's better. Yesterday it was like an hour and 15 minutes over. So usually we do break at 12:30 and we come back at 2 because I can teach you walking meditation in about 10 minutes, and then it's only going to take you like 20 minutes or so to do it, and then we'll talk about it. So if you guys would like to take a lunch all the way up till 2 o'clock, and then when you come back at 2, I'll teach you guys walking meditation, which is really good for an overactive mind, and it's going to help you to expand your meditation practice. So enjoy your lunch wherever you go, and we'll see you afterwards perhaps. Okay? Sawadee ka.